Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 31st chapter in the book of Job. This is the sixth and final chapter of Job's ninth and final speech. In the 26th chapter, he addresses Bildad, the final one of his companions from whom we hear in the 25th, and then the 27th he addresses the collective. Then in the 28th is an interesting and unusual interval, so much so that it has been suggested that the author of Job, whoever it was, it certainly wasn't Job. The author and reader alone is privy to the scenes of the first two chapters, which are foundational to this story. But he speaks of wisdom in the context. He compares it to the efforts and energies and ingenuity that the human race expends to dig the treasures from the earth. How much better would they be if they pursued wisdom? And then he asks these questions: where can wisdom be found? And he answers it: not along the living. Then in the 29th, it is distinctly and definitely Job talking. There's references to his life experience, and the 29th is a mountaintop experience. This was when Job had it well. He had fair weather faith. A lot of people cannot handle riches and righteousness. They cease to be righteous the more riches they have, because riches become their substitute deity. Job had passed that test, but something was missing in his life, and that was the valley experience. This is when he could develop the trait of foul weather faith. So he had to be tested whether he would forsake his faith and integrity if he had it all and lost it all. This is the nature of Satan's challenge. So the 30th is distinctly negative. The 29th is looking back with fond nostalgia to a life that once was, and Job is fully expecting to die any day now, and he's just recounting and mourning and lamenting his present situation in the 30th chapter. We divided this into two halves. We're going to review the 16 through 31, though not every verse in that range, beginning with 16 and 17. And now my life pours itself out. Days of depression seize me. My bones have been pierced in me at night, and my gnawings never lie down. Emotional torment and physical anguish was Job's present situation. He was seized by days of depression. He had nothing, no hope, no future, no idea that Yahweh had not in fact forsaken him, when was watching and paying attention to his entire reaction to the experience. He was testing him and not punishing him for anything that he deserved. But there were definite physical consequences on top of the emotional and spiritual pain. His bones, he was emaciated and fasting to the point where his bones were poking out of his body, and the gnawing is just hunger pangs or whatever. He hasn't eaten in some 7 days at least. Verse 20, I cry out to you, but you do not answer me. I stand up, and you understand me. You have become cruel to me. With the power of your hands you oppose me. He's not denying his omnipotence or his sovereignty, but he's accusing him of being personally cruel and capricious to Job without any good reason or anything else. He had inflicted this this calamity on him for an arbitrary reason, because Job had not. So he considered himself an enemy, and he couldn't understand. What he couldn't understand was that he had not treated Yahweh like not a friend. So he couldn't understand why he was being treated like an enemy. He had done no wrong, and his answers, the torture of his answers, the uninterrupted line of divine blessings was suddenly canceled out. He could not even get an answered prayer, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how frequently or fervently he prayed. Verse 26, when I looked for good, then evil came for me, and then when I waited for light, darkness came. Job was not looking for trouble when trouble found him out. It was satanically sent. The Sabaean raiders and another nomadic group of people stole his cattle and his sheep collectively, and a storm wind blew the physical structure which housed his oldest son, and all the children were gathered there. So he lost his wealth and his family in the first chapter. Then he lost his health with terrible skin boils. So evil was no exaggeration for what was visited upon him, and Job was a good person, good, upright, honest, true, ethical, integrity, just impeccable. But evil came to him and visited him nevertheless, and the book of Job belongs in the genre and category of theodicy, which attempts to explore and explain the relationship of suffering to the righteous. Why do bad things happen to good people? And in one of the chapters, Job reverses the question, says, why do all these good things happen to bad people? Verse 29, I became a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. jackals would have been understood as just these figures and animals of desolation and ruin. When the jackals were dwelling on a city, that meant it was a ghost town. The jackals were coming and scooping up. So it was symbolic of decline. And that is where Job felt. He felt like he was in a ghost town. He was once flourishing at the city gate. Now he is bereft of friendship and protection or guidance or anything else or blessing. And verse 31, so my lyre became mourning, and my flute the sound of weeping. You should always have a song on the tip of your tongue, a song of praise, no matter how down and out you are. But it is understandable for Job to not be wanting to sing praises, because his prayers were not being answered. He was praying intently, fervently, and frequently, and yet he had no song to sing that was not one of lament and woe and misery and sadness. And that's okay, because he was being honest. And honesty is one. Now, in the range we're going to cover today, there are three. Now, Job, in the sixth and final chapter of his ninth and final speech, he rests his case on his own innocency. We learn of certain things that he never did, and things also that he did. So there's a positive dimension and a negative dimension to the righteous life. First verse, 31st chapter. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a maiden? Covenant means an oath, and this is something you have to take seriously. It is not recommended that you enter into a vow that you are not prepared to honor. So the nature of Job's vow was that he would not look at a woman with lust. I know myself well enough to not take the vow, because when you take a vow, you invite curses and consequences, and in fact, death. A vow is a very serious thing, but Job was righteous enough to trust himself. We all do it. Look at a maiden with lust. Look at a member of the opposite sex with lust. We are wired that way, and it's okay to admire a woman's beauty from a distance, but when we ogle them and just seduce them with our eyes, and it becomes a substitute for the act, that is the moral equivalent of adultery itself. So adultery begins in the heart, and Job knew the destructive direction of lust, and lust is a counterfeit variety of love. It is satanic. Love is divine. Lust is satanic. Satan is a master counterfeit artist who never has an original idea to call his own, but what he does is he has a corrupt, malign, polluted, and perverted counterfeit of the authentic article. So those who are smitten with lust, lust has enough characters and properties of love to convince those who are smitten by experience, by its spirit, that they have the real thing. But it is just, now there are many forms of lust, lust for money, lust for power, lust for anything else, but the lust that he speaks of here is of a sexual nature, ogling at a member of the opposite sex. But that is something he did not do, and he took it. But the other thing about vows is, I want to remind you that we are not saved by the promises that we make and keep to God, but we are saved by the promises he makes and keeps for us. For what is the portion of Eloah from above, and the inheritance of El Shaddai from on high? The inheritance of those who belong to him, those who are his saints, those who are his beloved, those who are his chosen people, is heaven, and in his presence, and in we don't want to limit ourselves. Every desire we want will be met, and then some, beyond our reckoning and imagining, in this heavenly homeland which awaits us. But Job has some ambiguity and some confusion and some doubt as to his eternal station. He does not speak with a consistently uniform voice from start to finish. He struggles with doubts, but he does occasionally burst into profound Christological allusions of his Redeemer living, and he will walk him and he will resurrect him in the 19th chapter. So Job has a sophisticated understanding of the afterlife, and the doctrine of the resurrection was from the beginning. So this book is even before the writing of Genesis chronologically. Is it not calamity to the perverse, and the strangeness to the workers of wickedness? Calamity, now the perverse deserve calamity, and they in fact often invite it. Part of the cause, the overlap and interchange of human agency is that when one wicked person inflicts their wickedness from their own voluntary volition on another, then it has a boomerang effect which inspires a wicked response, and eventually and inevitably it traps the precipitator of the wicked one. So this is This is what the Hindus refer to as karma, but Christians are more familiar with the agricultural analogy of reaping what one sows. But the workers of wickedness, they will think it's strange that all these evils that they inflicted on others are being visited on them, and they will not be moved to repentance. They will not be convicted. Does he not see my ways and number all my steps? He is omnipresent and omniscient. That means he knows everything about us and then some, not only about us, but about every item in the universe, start to finish, all the way, thoroughly and instantly. So there is you can run, but you cannot hide from God. You can eliminate the idea altogether that he even exists in your imagination, but deep down it is not healthy to suppress that inescapable reality that he sees all, knows all, and we will have to answer to him one day. If I have walked with falsehood, or if my foot has hurried to deceit. So he covers the first, he's moving on to the next sin. This is the sin of deceit, and this would have been applicable to Job in the commercial conduction of his business transactions. He was honest, and he did not he did not lie. He did not use dishonest scales or uneven scales or just all these other things. But deceit is and the Decalogue, which had not yet existed when Job lived or when the book of Job was written. Falsehood in the it can be the eighth commandment, because he was talking about in business, so it could have been stealing. Deceit and deceitful business practices do amount to stealing, but also falsehood in the ninth. In a court of law, false witness is a serious sin. That is the other falsehood. Let him weigh me in the right scale, and let Eloah know my integrity. So Job has ironclad certainty and confidence that he is honest and he is not lying, and he will be vindicated because he knows and understands that Yahweh sees all and knows all. So Job could care less about the restoration of his loss of property or anything else. His main concern is his vindication, and he prays and he longs for an audience with El Shaddai, who will vindicate him, and he does. He does come away from the experience with a sense of his own nothingness. So the sin of self-righteousness is removed from the experience, and he is restored twofold of what he once had, as measured in cattle and livestock and sheep and children. If my steps turn from the way, or my heart has gone after my eyes, or if spot has clung to my hands, let me sow and another eat, and let my harvest be rooted out. This is part of the covenant, so the covenant is a two-way street. This is a personal vow, and Job is inviting these things to happen if what he says is not true. So he takes a vow is something you have to take very seriously. You do not enter into lightly, but he's asking, let my crops not grow, or let my crops grow, but may I not benefit from eating them. Let another eat what I grow, or my harvest just be wiped out entirely. If I deviate in any way, shape, or form from the way wouldn't have quite been the covenant way, because the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, had yet to exist, but the way is the way of righteousness and way of understanding. It's also capitalized here, so the way would before Christianity became Christianity, it was simply known as the way. It is the way we live, and that is the way of righteousness, and Job certainly lived that, so he was a pre-Christian Christian in a sense, and not even a Jew, in fact. But his heart had not gone after his eyes. Eyes are tricky, and eyes are central, because our eyes gravitate, they follow our innermost desires of the heart. So our eyes and hearts are closely connected. What we look at, what we fill our eyes with, is an evaluation of the priorities of our heart. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down over him. So this is connected to the covenant that he had made with an eyes that he will not look at with another woman with lust. So being enticed by a woman means seduced. Not necessarily they are seducing you, but you are seduced by them. So they are the object of your pursuit. And if this had happened, or if he had deliberately sought it out by just creeping physically around his neighbor's property for when he is not home to seduce his wife, if he had did these things, then he's willing to volunteer the loss of his wife as his property as wife, and also just relationship and the mutual exclusivity. So he takes even looking or coveting another. This is the 10th commandment. So adultery is the 7th commandment, but the attitude commandment influences all the action commandments in that Decalogue. For that would be a wicked scheme and a punishable wickedness. The wickedness live by scheming. They plot and they manipulate and they conspire just to get ahead and just as a matter of course, matter of survival. But Job is not scheming. He lives honestly, openly, transparently, with unimpeachable, blameless, irreprovable integrity. And he seems to suggest that those who live by this way deserve the wickedness, the punishment that comes their way. But Job cannot understand what he has done to deserve the punishment and the wickedness that has come on him for his trivial wickedness. He does acknowledge that he is a sinner, but he has certainly not sinned in proportion to the calamity that is visited upon him. And that's much of what he's doing in the 31st chapter. He's pleading his innocence, which he maintains from the start to the end. That's why the sustained stalemate exists in the debate between Job and his three friends. It's an irresistible force meeting an immovable object. They all cling to the archaic black and white theological prism inflexibly, that suffering is the result of personal sin, and they seem to think that the heavenly justice and the earthly are parallel and overlap, and his justice is perfectly reflected from the heaven on the earth. But Job's experience clearly invalidates the premise of their suggestion. So Job's pleading his innocence. They're saying he's a secret sinner, a sneaky sinner, and he just needs to confess and repent, and he will be restored. But Job didn't care about the restoration. He cared about his vindication. That's how righteous he was. For that would be a fire that burns to destruction and takes root among my increase. Lust is comparable to a fire in that it just has this explosive potential. It's almost contagious, or it can be contagious. But it's also a destructive direction, just doing these things or harboring these imaginations in your heart. So thinking as a man thinks, he becomes, because so our thoughts determine our actions. Thoughts are where it all begins. Thoughts are ground zero in the spiritual struggle, in the battle we are engaged in. But to take root, so he's saying that he would deserve to lose his increase, his gain, his profit, if any of the stuff that he said that he did not did, if he did it, then he would accept the consequences of his actions. If I have refused the plea of my male servant or of my female servant when they complained against me. Job was a master. He was a rich man and a prosperous one and an influential one and a prominent one. So he would have employed servants, and they would have been socially inferior to him. But Job was a benevolent master. He did not abuse, exploit, malign, or discard any of his servants. He loved them. They liked working for him. Now they won't even look at him, and he has to beg them. He says in a previous chapter, but he was deferential to all his servants, and much of the Christian ethos extends even to slave masters to treat their slaves accordingly. So in the early Roman times, early Christianity, masters and servants who were Christians could get along, even slaves. So that all depends on the nature of the master. Whether he is cruel and capricious, then the slave has no chance or expectation for a benign life in their servant or slave superior capacity. Then what should I do when El rises up, and when he punishes, what should I answer him? Job is bereft of words. He cannot comprehend, far less explain. and he cannot comprehend, far less control what happens in his life. So he is at the mercy of a power greater than himself, and he seems to suggest that Yahweh is the one who is punishing him, El Shaddai, but it is in fact Satan. And what's curious is that the Satan, the evil one, does not receive a single mention in any of Job or his comforters. We only read that word in the first 2 chapters when he's in the heavenly, he has heavenly access, and he works his, he presents his challenge, which Yahweh consents to. But what would he answer him? And earlier, he again, Job does not speak with a consistent, uniform balance. He says at one point, I would have just the words to answer to him if he came down right now and judged me. And other times in the 9th chapter, he says, what could I say? And when he is revealed, he is ultimately stunned into silence. He does mutter out a few words. They are of his own insignificance. Did not he who made me in the womb make him, and did not one fashion us in the womb? So whether servant or master, we all bear the stamp and the insignia, the image of our common Creator. As such, we have equal worth, dignity, and due. None of us are better than others, even though there are hierarchies in human society. We are all equal in the hands of the one who made us. So Job did not consider himself any better or more special in the hands of his maker than he did his servants. That's just how righteous he was. So there is an equality amongst all who bear the image. The Creator does not distribute his gifts evenly, and some of us are better at certain things than other people, but none of us are any better than any other. We all spring from the same hand, and we all have the same potential and the same fingerprint of love in all of us. If I have withheld the poor from pleasure, or caused the widow's eyes to fail, or eaten my piece of bread by myself, and the fatherless did not eat of it, but from my mouth he grew up with me as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided her. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of garments, or a poor one without covering, if his loins have not blessed me, and he warmed himself with the fleece of my sheep. Job goes on and on and on. These are things that he did not do, but he also says much of what he did do. So he's moving on into sins of omission. These are failures to act. To withhold your hand from the poor would have been to fail to dispense of generosity and charity when the opportunity presents itself. How do we do that? Well, when we come up with we retreat to the lie that we don't have any money when a homeless man asks us for it, because we are not prepared. We are withholding and we are lying to them, when really we should just tell them that we don't want to give it to them. That would be morally better than not giving him it and saying you don't have any to give. Or the widows, these people are vulnerable, oppressed, exploitable, especially in the ancient world. They had as females, they had no employment opportunities, no ways to earn. So the law, which did not exist when Job was written or when Job lived, it reflects Yahweh's concern and tender mercies for the widows, the fatherless, the orphans, the abandoned and forsaken, the lost, the lowly, the least, and the lost. Or eaten my piece of bread by myself, and the fatherless did not eat of it. So the fatherless are the orphans. These people are without a father figure to protect them or provide for them or to raise them. So they would have had to fend for themselves. And if Job saw one of them fending for himself and he had a piece of bread, of course he would have given what he had in his power. This is not so he did not indulge in the sin of omission, which would have been the failure to act when the opportunity presented itself. And Job also went out of his ways to feed the poor. But from my youth he grew up with me as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided her. So he was a father in the sense that he provided them and protected them, but he was not a father in the sense that he raised them. They did not live with him, so he did not adopt them as his children, but he was a father figure in the sense that he was a protector and a provider of them, and he did not abandon one who was born, because orphans are orphans for life. Once your father's dead, or your mother, that means, or both of them, that means they're gone for good. So they would have required long-term treatment, and Job was there, and as much as he had the resources to accommodate that vacancy, he was there. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of garments, or a poor one without covering, clothes are absolutely essential for survival. They are closely connected to shelter, much in the same way we require roofs over our head to survive the elements. So too do we need clothes to protect ourselves from the wind chill, because as mammals, we are the least mammalian mammals as measured by the amount of hair on our epidermis. Up here we are more reflective of other mammals. Down here, not so much. So we require clothes, and it was, you could sue a man for his garment, and that was the only one he had. That means you would have been naked for the night. So that the theme of nakedness is, we don't see any even homeless people naked in our days, but it would have been the ultimate disgrace and shame in the ancient world. 20th and final verse, we're going to divide this chapter in half. If his loins have not been blessed with me, and he warmed himself in the fleece of my sheep. So what he's saying there is he was there to bless his loins and warm himself. His sheep was their sheep. Mi casa, su casa. If I have something, you will have it too. If you have 2 garments, give one to one who has none. Luke 3:11, and this is the type of morality and the out of their way. So it extends to extending the gift, going out of your way, seeking out those who and that's just the type of person that Job was. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.